Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to call this meeting to order, the Mayor and Board of Commissioners for January the 10th, 2023. Can I have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Braun?
Here.
Commissioner Pearson?
Here.
Commissioner Warnick? Let the record show you do have a quorum.
Thank you. Will you rise with me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will you bow your heads with me for a brief prayer? Father God, I ask for your protection, Lord, for our citizens. I ask for you to watch over our elected body and our police officers, God. I ask that you be with us as we're here this evening. Please be with our armed forces serving overseas as well as our first responders, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, first on the agenda is the consent. Town Administrator, do you have that?
Yes, it's in front of you.
Okay. So it's the approval of the 12/27/2022 meeting. And this was already approved, or we need to approve it?
We need to approve this.
Okay, could I get a motion to approve that summary?
I make a motion to approve the summary.
Second.
He's looking at what?
Maybe the timestamp.
Okay, so we don't need to approve this because it was already motioned in by Commissioner Pearson and seconded by Commissioner Braun.
Well, I thought we did that for the December one.
You're looking to approve the January 10th.
Right, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect, got you.
And that's what we made the
Okay,
motion for.
perfect. So there has been a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
All right, the approval of the 1/10/2023 town meeting is approved. All right, upcoming town meetings, Town Administrator, do you have that?
Yes. Sticking to the schedule the mayor and commissioners voted upon. Again, I want to remind everybody, it is subject to change as needed. Our next meeting will be Tuesday, March 14th, followed by a meeting on Tuesday, April 11th, followed by a meeting on Tuesday, May 9th, followed by a meeting on Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. And just to give everybody a heads up, we're running into budget season, so we might be approaching you to schedule some budget meetings also.
Thank you, Town Administrator. There are no public presentations or unfinished business at this time. Under new business is Ordinance 2023-01, which is the Stormwater Management Code. Town Administrator, do you have that?
Yes, I do. So what you have before you is ordinance number 2023-01, which essentially is an ordinance that would have the town of Rising Sun continue the process under the state law of enforcing stormwater management regulations within the incorporated limits of the town of Rising Sun. Currently, the town operates under essentially an MOU with the County Department of Public Works to basically handle the plan review and inspection of all stormwater projects in the town of Rising Sun. As I read this ordinance, it gives the explanation of why we're doing it. So if you folks are interested, we can read it into the minutes of the meeting.
What's the board's pleasure? Okay to read into the record?
You're just reading page 1
Yes. Yeah,
through 3?
that's correct.
Okay,
Yeah, yes.
go ahead.
Yes. And just to explain for the viewing audience, because of the nature of this change, normally when we make a change in an ordinance, we can capture that singular change in this enabling ordinance. But because we're basically eliminating the entire chapter, it would make for a very lengthy ordinance, so to speak. So we've attached the, whatever it is, 35 pages of the actual code as sort of an attachment to this ordinance, so people, when they pull this when they pull this ordinance in the future, they can see exactly what was adopted. So that's why it's multiple pages, but we don't have to read those. So this is an ordinance of the town of Rising Sun, Cecil County, Maryland, amending the general laws of the town of Rising Sun by amending and adding language to chapter 13 titled stormwater management ordinance for the purposes of having the town take over stormwater management plan review, recordation, and inspection of all stormwater management-related projects within the incorporated limits of the town of Rising Sun, and to repeal any and all other ordinances and parts of the ordinance in conflict therewith. Whereas the town located in Cecil County, Maryland is a municipality organized under the provisions of the Maryland Constitution and governed under the provisions of the local government article of the annotated code of Maryland, and whereas the town is proclaimed as a perpetual entity with the right to pass laws, and whereas the town of Rising Sun has a system of conveyances owned and operated by the town designed to use for collecting or conveying stormwater, MS4, and has been designated as a Phase 2 small MS4 municipality under the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System, NPDES, and as such is required to implement minimum control measures to include an illicit discharge detection and elimination, IDDE, program. And whereas the town of Rising Sun is currently responsible for ensuring that all development occurring within the incorporated limits of the town are designed and constructed in a manner that is consistent with the state of Maryland stormwater management regulations pursuant to the environmental article, Title 4, Subtitle 2 of the annotated Code of Maryland, 2009 replacement volume. And whereas as defined in Chapter 13 of the Town Code titled Stormwater Management Ordinance, the town has designated the Cecil County Department of Public Works to perform the necessary plan review and inspection of all stormwater management projects related to land development. And whereas the mayor and commissioners want to combine their responsibilities as a Phase 2 small MS4 municipality with the land development process, and to move forward with acting in place of the Cecil County Department of Public Works, and to take over the formal review and inspection of stormwater management projects within the incorporated town of Rising Sun. And whereas the mayor and commissioners wish to make the necessary changes to Chapter 13, titled Stormwater Management Ordinance, to move forward with this process as provided for in the state of Maryland stormwater management regulations pursuant to the environmental article, Title 4, Subtitle 2, annotated Code of Maryland, 2009 replacement volume. Now therefore be it enacted and ordained by the authority of the mayor and commissioners of the town of Rising Sun, Cecil County, Maryland, that Chapter 13 of the codified ordinances of the town shall be modified as follows. Section 1, Chapter 13 shall be amended as follows. Amendment 1. The title of Chapter 13 shall be deleted in its entirety and replaced to read as Chapter 13 Stormwater Management Code. Amendment 2. Chapter 13 contains 13 articles. Articles 1 through 9 and Articles 11 through 13 shall be deleted in their entirety and replaced to read as shown on the attached document titled Chapter 13 Stormwater Management Code. Article 10, titled Illicit Discharge Detection and Elimination, IDDE, shall remain intact and unchanged. The rest of the sections are the boilerplate language regarding the code itself. A couple things to answer some questions regarding this. Again, when we get to page 5, that's where you start to see the actual code that you are adopting. And essentially, a lot of this language was already in the code, but it's all been updated significantly in terms of what is required under the Maryland environmental article. So in the past, up until this ordinance, Cecil County would act on our behalf to make sure that any development project complied with that environmental article. What this is essentially doing is wherever there was a reference to Cecil County, it's now referencing the town of Rising Sun or its designated representative. And what we're essentially going to do is what the town of Elkton does currently, in which they have their third-party engineering firm review all of the plan submittals that are submitted in the town of Elkton. that need to come into compliance with the stormwater management, none of that goes to the county. Their engineering firm does that, and then they make recommendations back to the town, which is then manifested in the land development approval that takes place in the planning commission process. So what we're essentially doing, and you've heard me talk about MS4 requirements, we have to regulate stuff that goes into the stormwater drains, but the missing link was we have nothing to do with the design, construction, and inspection of those items. And we just feel that bringing that in-house will make a smoother transition of all that information that needs to come before the planning commission in order for them to make good, solid decisions on land development projects. So that, in a nutshell, is essentially what this ordinance is doing.
Thank you, Town Administrator. Would the board go through the process of adopting it?
Yes.
But if they did, it would be under an emergency, is that correct?
Yes, as provided for in the town code, you can adopt ordinances one of two ways. It could be, you read it and adopt it at your next meeting, or when you feel it is an emergency to move it forward, you can enact it as an emergency ordinance. We have a lot of land development projects that are starting to bubble to the surface, and we don't want to try to make this change when we're in the middle of that process. We want to do it on the front end.
And the board has had informal discussions with you, and Commissioner Warnick is aware and approves of this ordinance, from my understanding. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. Could I get a motion to approve ordinance
I make a motion
2023-01?
that we approve ordinance number 2023-1.
Is there a second?
A second.
Can I ask that you amend that to approve it as an emergency ordinance?
Okay, let me restate it. I would like to create an emergency ordinance number 2023-01 so that it can be enacted tonight.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussions regarding
Well,
this
yeah,
ordinance?
I would just like to say this. What Calvin is not saying is the current process in the county can take an extremely long time to get this wastewater your management plans approved. If you have any type of potential development, and we do, in both Stevens Preserve and Knutson's, we can control the time frame for those developments much easier when we control through our own system, basically our own destiny. So that's why I was in favor of this being an emergency ordinance.
Mayor, if you would, Commissioner Pearson, you also sparked my, what I want to make a statement is to make it clear, we're not creating new stormwater management regulations. These are essentially going to be identical to the counties because the law regarding stormwater comes from the Maryland state law.
Right. Yeah, these aren't new laws.
That's correct.
All we're doing is saying we're taking
The
the
responsibility.
responsibility
Yes.
for granting the stormwater management.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. All in favor of approving ordinance 2023-01?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes. Thank you, Town Administrator. Next on the agenda is Resolution 2023-01, which is a fee schedule for the land development, stormwater management. Town Administrator, do you have that?
Yes, and essentially what this is if we're going to be taking over the stormwater management review and inspection process, we have to incorporate what those charges are going to be in our fee schedule. But in addition to that, we're also addressing the cost associated with land development projects coming before the town. And I'll highlight it when we look at the actual fee schedule. But we have essentially inherited a lot of outdated fees and processes in our fee schedules in the past. So in addition to creating the stormwater management review and inspection fees, we're also marrying that to the land development process to make a more equitable fee. I can tell you quite honestly, the fee schedule that we currently have would, the costs were exorbitantly high for development to occur, and we probably would have faced legal challenges. The only reason why we didn't is whenever they adopted this back in the early 2000s, the sewer and water moratorium created basically a standstill on development, and essentially none of the developers had to pay. I mean, we're talking in excess of, in some cases, over $100,000 just to get plans reviewed. And that's, that's incredibly higher than what industry standard is. So, if you would like, I will read the resolution into the minutes.
Sounds good.
All right, so this is Resolution 2023-01, titled Fee Schedule Amendment, Fees Related to Land Development, Stormwater Management Plan Review, Recordation, and Inspections. I'll skip over the boilerplate at the beginning of the whereas, and go to the fourth whereas. It says, the town's current fee schedule contains Section 5 titled Annexation, Land Development, and Zoning Fees, which provides for the establishment of fees associated with the development of land or renovation of properties that creates the need for an additional connection to the town's sewer and/or water infrastructure. And whereas the mayor and commissioners have passed ordinance 2023-01 titled Stormwater Management Code, in which the town will now act in the place of Cecil County in the review, approval, and inspection of stormwater management plans for projects within the incorporated limits of the town of Rising Sun, as provided for in the state of Maryland stormwater management regulations pursuant to the environmental article, Title 4, Subtitle 2, Annotated Code of Maryland, 2009 replacement volume. And whereas the mayor and commissioners also wish to streamline the entire land development process and to bring fees associated with those services in line with industry standards, while making sure that any cost associated with the management of these services is borne by the applicant seeking development by way of fees reflected in the town's fee schedule and not the general tax revenues collected by the town. Now therefore be it enacted and resolved that the mayor and commissioners of the town of Rising Sun are modifying Section 5 titled Annexation, Land Development, and Zoning Fees of the town's existing fee schedule by restructuring the layout of the fees for easier review and understanding. Changes in actual fees or new fees are highlighted in red on the attached document and will be made a part of the overall town fee schedule. So when you look at what we're doing, this is Section 5. One of the things we're doing is adding stormwater management to the original title. It's important to note that in all of our fees, we typically protect, and I want to say it this way, we protect the overall citizens of the community of their tax-paying dollar not being used for work that's associated with a singular project in town that is done for the benefit of the owner of that project. Said it differently, I always like to think that we don't want a senior citizen on a fixed income hypothetically having their tax dollar being used for the review of a land development project that's going to yield hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars of profit to somebody. So in order to do that, we also put in here that if the town has to engage its attorney, engineering review, advertising, and the cost of recordation, because those numbers can fluctuate, we set the fee schedule up that we're telling you what it costs for us to do our work and to go before the Board of Appeals and before the Planning Commission. Any of the other expenses related to advertisement, engineering, and attorney, those charges will be billed directly to the applicant. And that's not unusual in the industry. So in looking here, you can see all the things that are in black are the same, nothing has changed there. But we basically took the land development process and broke it down into smaller bite-sized pieces For one reason, there's lots of things that the town does in the development process that the town never gets reimbursed for those services. One of them is if somebody comes in and just wants to have a short discussion with the planning commission to get an idea of what they might or might not have to do on a particular subject matter, the town has to pay for the advertisement of that. And as you recall, we now pay our planning commission basically a stipend to serve on the planning commission. So this $250 to go before the planning commission will offset what we're paying the planning commission to serve on those boards. So that is a good snapshot of everything going forward. So sketch plans is $350. Concept plan, it's important to note that in the old fee schedule, and I'm gonna show you this, it just had concept plans listed as a one-size-fits-all. It had preliminary and final plat review as a one-size-fits-all. And it also had charges of $150 per lot, where if somebody's doing a single lot, that doesn't really cover the town's costs, but it's a heck of a lot cheaper than somebody who's coming in doing a 200-home subdivision or a 300-home subdivision for that matter. That's where you start to get exorbitant costs. So what we've done is broken the concept plan into bite-sized pieces, whereas if somebody comes in to basically take one large lot and turn it into a second lot, that review cost is much cheaper. If it's a minor subdivision, which is covered in our code, that has a cost. A major subdivision has a cost. And you see where that carries through all of these documents, the preliminary plan review and the final plan review. Now, the reason why there are fluctuations in the cost is because certain projects like minor subdivision and major subdivisions, at that concept level, there really isn't a delineation in the amount of work that has to be done on a concept plan between a minor and a major. So that's why the cost is identical. But when you get up to a preliminary plan review, there's a big difference between a minor subdivision and a major. Real quick, a minor subdivision is when you're going to create 3 lots or less. When you create 4 or more lots, that's a major subdivision. So we're also, by doing this, we're putting a cap on the charges. So there isn't a runaway cost of $150 per lot. If you have a major subdivision, whether you do 4 houses or 200 houses, you're paying the same amount of money for that. Because the review at that point is essentially the same in what you're looking at. Again, we're not looking, when you're doing review of subdivisions, it's not like a building permit where you're looking at the construction plan for each individual house. You're looking at the overall development in its totality. And so that's why, one, we have a cap on it, and 2, there's a difference between a major and a final. The other thing that we picked up is we really didn't have a good charge on the final plat recordation or the final as-built. That's something that the town didn't really do in the early 2000s when developments were done. And where that creates a problem is when you go into our records that we have, or if you go into the courthouse looking for the way a development was built, you can have all the great intentions of the world for a development to look a certain way when you get your approval, but you hit a giant rock in the middle of the road and the sewer and water pipes have to be moved because of it, because you can't get it out. That's where a final as-built will reflect that. So we often, when we're doing code reviews internally, we run into not having a good set of plans on what is out there. And so we want to make sure that we require, just like the industry does, final as-built. Now, it's important to note that, again, these costs are what's going to be the cost for basically my time and Gary's time to do sort of a 10,000-foot elevation view where the engineer is going to get into the nuts and bolts of the actual review. And I'm going to say it to you this way, we don't really just want to turn this service over to a third-party entity with no oversight. And so part of what we're doing is making sure that the town is served properly. This is not a reflection of our current engineering firm, but Commissioner Pearson, I know you can relate to what we ran into in the early 2000s when an engineering firm working for a developer was signing off on the developer's plans and then also signing off on representing the town of Rising Sun. And sometimes those engineers would flip back and forth. And so it raises a question of whether or not the fox is guarding the hen house. So we're trying to build these protections in, and there's a cost associated with that. So that's basically what this fee schedule is handling on the land development side. And then because we're taking over the stormwater review and inspection, again, we're gonna look at the plans internally to make sure that our third-party engineer is covering everything that needs to be covered. And that holds true for the preliminary plan, the final plan, and the final as-built. The rest of section 5 all remain exactly the same. So that's the change in the fee schedule.
Could I get a motion to approve Resolution 2023-01, which is the fee schedule, land development, stormwater management?
I make a motion, I make a motion for resolution 2023-01.
Is there a second?
I second.
All right. Any discussion further about the fee schedule? I think the town administrator laid it out pretty well. Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Passes. Thank you, town administrator. Next on the agenda is citizens' input. Would anyone like to speak this evening?
You're the only citizen.
Anyone? All right, moving forward into staff reports. Town administrator.
A couple of things I'd like to add. And it's funny, that old saying that things happen in threes or pairs, whatever. We have received 5 requests now for the extension of water and sewer beyond the town limits because people are starting to realize those septic systems in and around the town are not operating the way they should be. Again, this goes back to the old development days where there were a lot of questions as to perk tests that were being done, and I'm hearing horror stories of people saying they're on their 3rd and possibly 4th well that they're trying to drill because the water quality is bad. This is not to be confused with the request that I told you about previously, where the county is looking to approve the replacement of failing septic systems in certain areas around the town. But because there is no septic public sewer in the area, the county under county code has to give them permission to construct a new septic system. And that is, and I want to make it clear, the county health department would like to get those failing septic systems onto public sewer, but there's no public sewer in proximity of those properties. And I think I've reported like 3 or 4 over the last 3 months. Now, I guess maybe some residents are getting wind of that and they're saying, well, why don't you extend water and sewer to us? So as I advised the board, I did put in a grant application to the Maryland Department of the Environment on Friday to potentially pay for these extensions. So just updating you on that. We are getting inquiries about failing wells and septic in and around the town, and we've known it's been there. We've heard about it for years, but I guess it's starting to come to fruition, and that's all I have.
Well, let me just comment on something, okay? We've been blasted for many years about going with Chester Water Authority. One of the fears we had back in 2009, 2010 was the long-term quality of wells. And having met with MDE engineers and all, there was no guarantee on anything with the wells in the area. When you're financing something for 40 years, you've got to have some kind of a safeguard in that provision. That is not available with wells, and unfortunately, some of the wells that are now starting to come up with some problems would have been in close proximity to what the town's wells were, where they would have been drilled. So, I hope people can understand, it wasn't an easy decision, but in the long term, we were afraid of where the future would lead with that.
Commissioner Pearson, you bring up an excellent point, and I'd like to expand upon it because there's some really interesting things that have come out of this. What you're referring to, if you recall, we got 5 separate engineering firms to give us independent estimates of what it would cost to bring a well system online. Because remember, we could not drill those wells in our existing watershed. We had to go outside of the watershed. And we had estimated prices anywhere from like $24 million to $38 million. We would have had to invest in that, and going to your point, there's no guarantee they would have held up. A reminder, the Chester Water Project cost the town $10.5 million to get 1 million gallons of water to the town of Rising Sun. There's a big difference in that. The other thing that is played out is, if you see in the news, the Cecil Wig was covering it, a chemical, it's like 1,000 chemicals that come up under a classification. The acronym is PFAs, and you're hearing about it in the news left and right. And PFAs are scaring a lot of communities. For instance, the state of Delaware is getting hit really hard with PFAs in their water systems. And PFAs don't have a shelf life. They never go away. And if you read recently, Cecil Wig did an article on the fact that the town of Elkton has joined a lawsuit against Gore in Elkton because the products that Gore was producing are, let's just say, they've targeted entities that have the environmental folks say that are the likely cause of the PFA areas. I don't want to suggest that Gore is guilty here, but I believe they are named in the lawsuit. West Nottingham Academy is another one that has PFAs in their water. As I've said before, the Maryland Department of the Environment has recommended West Nottingham Academy receive water from the town of Rising Sun as one of the options. That hasn't happened for a whole host of reasons that we've talked about in the past. But the really interesting thing is, Chester Water is located in Pennsylvania. They draw all of the water out of Pennsylvania. The state of Pennsylvania has over 400 water distribution systems that have various levels of PFAs that are higher than the allowable limit, or the proposed allowable limit, because the EPA is trying to catch up to what those limits are going to be. And they're supposed to be putting them into law, I believe, around late 2023. Chester Water does not have PFAs in its system. So what does that mean is that, first of all, it's important to note that if Chester Water were to ever have any kind of contaminant come into their system, under our agreement, they have to provide potable drinking water to the Maryland line, which means anything that Chester Water has to do to correct that is not borne directly by the residents of the town of Rising Sun. It's borne by the overall users on the system, but it's not a direct impact to the town of Rising Sun. So it's important to note they do not have any PFAs, and they're not required to test again until 2024. And we don't know, we're going to go through the process of testing our wells here in town, because although we don't draw any water out of those wells, we kept those wells as an emergency backup in case something ever happened to Chester Water. So what I'm getting at is that the investment of Chester Water back in 2000, the commitment going back to 2010 when it started, is really paying dividends. I know the rates are high right now. Here's the other thing. We did some research the other day, and the average cost of sewer for a user in the United States is $98 per month. That is higher than what the average cost of sewer is for residents in the town of Rising Sun. Are our rates the same as some of the other communities in Cecil County? No, they are not, because they are blessed by certain things. But they are going through having to do incremental increases. The average cost of water in the United States is roughly $88 per month, and in the state of Maryland, it's, I believe, about 86 or 87. That is the average cost for water in the town of Rising Sun. And let me just close with another important point here that gets lost. When you look at the rate structure of other communities, and I'm not going to point any fingers at any of the communities in Cecil County, but when you go out and look at rate structures in other communities, those rates that come out to $98 and $88, that's based on simply the treatment and the management of those systems at that point. What you will see as a separate charge is the charge for debt service. And so when you ask somebody what the average cost for sewer and water is in another community, sometimes there's another charge. I'm not suggesting that it's hidden, it's just another listing. Our debt service that we pay for Chester Water and the sewer plant, that's already in your current rate. So there's no separate charge to cover the debt service like there is in other communities. So when you look at our rate compared to the state and the national average, you can make an argument that it's really, I'm not going to say it's not bad, because money is money, but you have to also factor in the fact that on the state and national average, they're not taking into account the other charges related to infrastructure and debt service. That's just the rate to bring the water and sewer to your property. Again, ours is all baked, so to speak, into the same rate. So I think it's important for people to recognize, what the previous elected bodies and this elected body put in motion over the years.
Thank you. The chief is not able to join us this evening. His wife actually ended up having to have surgery, so our prayers are with Jen and the chief this evening.
He said he had nothing major to bring us
Okay.
on.
Assistant Town Administrator, do you have a report?
Just a brief one. We did have our employee recognition program today, where we provided lunch to our employees and said a thank you for all their efforts. It's an interesting thing to look at. You look at the tenure and the contributions of the departments that we have. We have 6 or 7 people that have been with this town all over 15 years, with one being with the town for 32, which is just amazing. We're working on some projects right now, and based on information that I received back from Maryland State Archives today, our records management program should be finalized in 90 days. So we'll see more on being able to start doing some other things with records management after their final decisions. And then the financial audit should be finished this week, and they will make presentation at our next meeting.
Thank you, Judy. Moving forward into the mayor's report, I did want to add to Judy that we ended up having a staff appreciation. We are so thankful to our town employees. I was able to attend on behalf of the Board of Commissioners and present their yearly appreciation pins that we are going to do every year. And we are also had a wonderful luncheon with them. Special congratulations to Chris George and his long tenure of service with the town of Rising Sun. We certainly appreciate Chris and all of our employees for all they have done for our community. I've reached out to State Highway to Timothy Smith, who is the State Highway engineer, in regards to our crosswalks that are in disrepair. There are crosswalks that go across our main street as well as South Queen Street that I couldn't put it any other way than they are just horrible looking. If State Highway does not want to repair them back to the stamped brick that we had before, and as you can see, the town takes care of and has crosswalks that are stamped brick that we take care of ourselves, then I'm asking them to mill up those crosswalks and put in new ones. I am hopeful that they will be able to do that by Sunfest. We're in ongoing negotiations with State Highway Administration to get that done. But with our Main Street continuing to grow and our small businesses being there, I think it's important to have decent-looking crosswalks for our citizens to cross onto our Main Street with. I also wanted to say that on February 28th, I have declared February 28th the Alexis Abrams Rare Disease Day. Rare diseases are something that are rarely talked about. Many suffer from diseases that are not publicized. Alexis Abrams is one of those girls in our community that reached out to me to see if we would celebrate Rare Disease Day and bring awareness to it. I've also asked that all the employees wear jeans on Rare Disease Day. That is the Jean Day is actually something that Alexis has come up with her Girl Scout troop. So we are asking that all of our town employees wear jeans on February the 28th. That is the conclusion of my report. Moving forward into commissioner comments. Commissioner Braun.
Yes, we had a planning and zoning board meeting on February 6th. The town administrator provided the members of the board with a copy of the proposed stormwater management code so that the members of the board could review it and become familiar with it. The town administrator then gave a brief history of the code's connection with the county and the town of Rising Sun and the need to consider the proposed code during the course of the land development process.
Thank you, Commissioner Braun. Commissioner Pearson.
Yeah, I just have one thing. Our candidate, Stephen Moore, is doing extremely well in the academy, and hopefully he will be on the street, I believe, in about 45 days. But from everything the chief has been indicated, he may be their valedictorian. So
That's great.
hopefully we get him on the street and he'll help. That's it.
Great. Moving forward into the schedule that you see before you for the Board of Zoning Appeals and Planning Commission. There's also upcoming town holidays as well as trash recycling and yard waste schedule. You can see those on the agenda as well as online. Is there anything else to come before the board this evening? Can I get a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.